Hi, I'm Paul Marcel. Well, my next project is kind of a fun project. It's for my best friend. He recently got married and then he went off to Tahiti for his honeymoon. He brought his wife. And while they were there, they found this picture painted by one of the locals that they really loved. So they decided to, bring it back, but of course you can never get a picture that's 5 foot by 3.5 foot on an airplane. So they took off the frame, rolled it all up, because of course they have a friend who could make a frame. And I'm not sure if you'll have any idea who that might be. So that's how I came into possession of the picture, and that's what I'm going to be doing this weekend, is building the frame for it. Now, the colors on this, as you can see, are predominantly, the blues, a couple different shades of lighter blue, and black. There are some accents with some red and some yellows in there. I'm not sure where that's going to go. So what I was thinking of doing is maybe doing, some nice solid black accent on the frame, and then using some blues, maybe different shades of blue somewhere in there. I have a couple different ideas in mind that I'll go through later. If I were to try doing anything with taking the yellow into account, about the most I could think of is, depending on the shape of the frame, maybe it would be pinned using some brass pins that would be, shown on the surface. That might look pretty good. Depends on what the frame is going to look like with the profile. I mean, some profiles are better mitered, whereas other profiles are, they can go square or mitered. So we'll see what I come up with on that. But that's the project for this weekend. So just for reference, when you tell your best friend who's going off on his honeymoon to bring back pictures, wink, this isn't what you mean. So let me tell you what I've come up with now for this picture frame. What I decided to do is I have a piece of quilted maple here that's got a lot of really nice curl. You can see a little bit of it through, even on the camera here. So it's really nice for that. And what I was hoping to do is to enhance this curl maybe with some blue, because there's a lot of blues in this picture, so that'll be really nice. Now, I'd also like to get some black involved on there, and just a stick of quilted maple on the side isn't going to be all that interesting. So what I decided to do for that is I took some poplar and I put an 1/8 inch bead on it. Now, let me show you the profile so you can see that a bit, and then I ripped it into little slices. So what the idea is going to be is I'm going to take this, now I already cut some veneer off on this, and you'll see that in a moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this quilted maple veneer to this poplar substrate. And I'll just get it for the thickness, and then I'll be thinning that down to whatever is appropriate for the picture later. Now, this is too wide. I don't want this on the side this wide. So my plan is, after I glue it to the substrate and I do some preparation with it, do the dye work and everything else on it, then I'll rip this in half. So I'll have about 1 5/8 inches of this colored band of quilted maple. Now, on either side of that, I have this piece of poplar with the bead, and I'll put one on either side. So again, this center section would be about 1 5/8 inches. Now, because I want to get some black in there, I'm going to dye these as black as I can possibly get it, and I'd like it to be a high gloss black. So between that, around this colored field of blue, it should look pretty good as an accent around the picture without distracting too much. I'm hoping it'll be, an enhancement, not all on its own. Now, I've already been experimenting with the dye a little bit. So what I have here, and actually I'm a little further ahead of the game than I admitted, this is a piece of the veneer already glued to the poplar substrate. But what I've been doing is I colored the grain blue with a dye. So you can see that the curl actually comes out pretty well. And actually, like most dyes, when a dye dries out, it's pretty flat. When this was wet, it was really singing. So what I did is, these are actually two different experiments that I have on the end of these boards. This one here, what I did is I applied blue dye, pretty heavily, and then after it dried, I sanded it back until basically all the blue was gone, except what was seeped in deeper in the curl. Since curl is basically end grain poked up to the top surface, of course, it's going to suck up a lot more dye than the rest of the flat grain, especially on maple. Some of that, it took a while to soak in onto the flat portions. So once that was absorbed, then I applied a second coat of the blue dye. So now the end grain has gotten, a really good soaking the first time and the second time, so it's much more enhanced with the blue, whereas the rest of the field is a little bit lighter on the blue. So that's what this one here is. This one I took a different tack. Now let me get these a little bit closer so you can see. On this second one here, what I did is I dyed it black. Waited for it to dry, sanded it back until just the black was in the curl, and then I applied blue over top of it. Now when you put the blue over top, it does tend to dominate that black and hide it since it's on the top. So what I did is after it dried, I took a slightly damp cloth and just gave it a really light pass, and that lightened up the blue enough that the black curl just comes right through. In all honesty, on the camera, this one here, that was done with this just blue and blue, looks better. But when I was doing the work and it was all wet still, and it looks more like it will when it's finished, this one here done with the black looked much better. So I think that'll look good with having the blackish curl or darker blue curl along with the lighter blue mixed in with the high gloss black along the side of this picture. So I think that's what I'm going to go for this. Now what I used for the blue is just General Finishes blue dye. I mean, if you can get yourself something like, say, Trans Tint blue, you can mix that yourself. I just find this much more convenient. Just give it a little bit of a shake and away you go. And that's for my blue. Now for the black, I used this. Now, just, okay, I had a project once that I needed some black dye, and I needed it that day. So I went to Michael's, and that's what you get when you go to Michael's, this little tiny container for $5.50. You can buy this India ink online in the quart size for like 20 bucks. So go for that route instead. But I'm going to go ahead and use this up on this and keep the bottle. So what this is, though, is it's India ink, but it's a waterproof version. So what I did is I applied that to the grain, and then I sanded it back. Now, one of the reasons why I try to get India ink both in waterproof and the regular versions is the regular version is very much just a very, very black dye. You're not going to get those violet overtones that you see when you use, say, Trans Tint black. Trans Tint black, if you blacken something like I did a project before previously, when I went to carry it over out of the car, in the sunlight, you can definitely see that bit of a dark violet hue to it. In the house it was perfectly fine, but that's just something I prefer to use a China ink to get that dead black look. Now the waterproof ink, the reason why I use that is when I applied it to this grain, it soaked in, and of course being waterproof, it's effectively sealing itself into the grain. I sanded it back and then I applied the blue dye. If I was using just a regular thing like a Trans Tint water-based dye, and I let that soak in, and then I sanded it back, when I go to apply the blue, it's going to dissolve some of that dye again and mix in. So it's going to make that dark curl that I'm trying to get is going to kind of get out of focus or fuzzy. It's going to be diluting itself into some of the blue, and some of the blue is going to be diluting itself and going down into the grain. So you're going to lose that distinction that I want. That's why I'm going for the waterproof ink, is that way there, it's going to get in the grain. When I apply the blue, it's not going to get dissolved by the blue, and the blue is not going to be able to really get into the curl too much simply because it's been sealed. For gluing the veneer down to the substrate, I'd like to use a plastic resin glue. So that's what I'm using here. I get this one from veneersupplies.com. It's called Better Bond. It works really well. It mixes beautifully. You don't get any lumps out of it, which is really nice. And then you just roller that on and go ahead and press it. And it actually cleans up very nicely with just water afterwards if you get it quickly. Now, if you're new to plastic resin glues, one of their big benefits is that they have a very, very rigid glue line. Another benefit that they have is that they cure slower, so you have a bit more setup time. I mean, overall, after 6 hours, you can take them out of the clamps, and basically after 24 hours, you should be pretty much set, depending on the glue that you're using. But the process of curing emits a lot of formaldehyde. Now, that's obviously not going to be very good for you, so make sure that you use a mask the whole time, including when you're mixing it, because when you're opening up this big bucket full of powder, it's going to be very easy for any little mistake to make a little cloud of powder, which is also why you're going to want some decent goggles, or at least at a minimum eye protection, to keep some of that dust from making it into your eyeball, which happens to have some water that it would like to cure with. So one other thing I wanted to mention is just, I have this planer sled over here, and I made it as a torsion box, so that it would remain flat and it would have some good rigidity as it's going through the planer. Now, I happen to use this quite often for doing things like what I'll be doing here for the glue up, and that is I want to make sure that that board stays straight and flat when I have it clamped down, and I don't really have a bench that's long enough where the whole surface is dead flat. So it works out well that this was designed to be dead flat, and it's going to stay flat because of the torsion box design. So what I did is I just applied a bunch of packing tape here so that any glue that spills out during the clamping process isn't going to lock it down to my planer sled and make it look gorgeous. Now with the mask on, it was a little hard to describe that as I went along. Basically, I had the water measured out already ahead of time for using 1.5 ounces of the powder. Now the way that you mix that is typically you mix in a little bit of water first so that you can get it through the chunks, get those broken down, and you have a very, very thick paste. And then you add the rest of the water to complete it, and then that one becomes much smoother. So if you put all the water in at the same time, you tend to have a lot more lumps. But this one here mixes very, very nicely, although it's already kind of tacky. Now, one thing I did along the way that you would have noticed is after I put the substrate on, I wiped it with a wet sponge. Now, why would I have done that? What I tried to show you when I lifted up the veneer board after I put the glue on and showed you the square on it is that the veneer was already cupping down to the board because the water-based glue that was applied to the one surface made that surface swell, making it larger, so it made it cup down. So the problem is, of course, this big board that I put on the top, the substrate, is also going to absorb a little bit of water. So what I decided to do is I just give it a light pass with it's not very damp, this sponge. It's just to give a little bit of humidity on that top surface to kind of compensate for the fact that the other surface is getting a lot more water. So whether or not it is important in the whole end game or not, I don't know, but I feel that it's not a bad precaution to do. And then, now the glue itself, when it dries up, it's like glass. It's hard. So when you go to trim that off on the edge, just be aware of the fact that any little parts of it that get broken off, if you're just taking just a light pass on the edge to clean that off on your table saw, the fragments are going to hurt unless you've got a guard on that'll suck that away or you're out of the way. And yes, chopsticks make the best stir sticks. You can go to an Asian market and you can pick up 100 of them for $1.50.